Did you know Canada once went to war with Denmark, armed only with whiskey and schnapps? That there's a town where your breath literally freezes mid-air and falls to the ground with a tinkling sound? That Canadian soldiers burned down the White House and the US president had to flee for his life? And that there's a place called Dildo, Newfoundland, where residents actively fought to keep the name? Canada isn't just hockey and apologies. It's alcohol-fueled territorial disputes, temperatures so extreme they break the laws of physics, military victories America wants to forget, and town names so inappropriate they became profitable tourist attractions. If you love discovering the bizarre side of history, hit subscribe because we're counting down 50 absolutely absurd facts about Canada. By fact number 1, you'll understand why the true North is hiding darker, weirder, and more shocking secrets than any other country on Earth. At number 50, Canada has more lakes than all other countries in the world combined. The country contains approximately 60% of the world's lakes. There are over 2 million lakes across Canadian territory. Of these, 31,752 lakes are larger than 3 square kilometers. The province of Ontario alone has over 250,000 lakes. If you tried to visit one lake per day, it would take over 5,000 years to see them all. Canada is essentially a nation floating on water. Number 49. The border between Canada and the United States is the world's longest international border. It stretches 8,891 kilometers, including the Alaska-Canada border. Most of it is undefended and unmarked in wilderness areas. In some places, the border cuts directly through buildings. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House sits exactly on the border. The audience sits in the United States, while performers stand on stage in Canada. People cross international borders just by walking across a room. At number 48, Canada consumed more Kraft Dinner, macaroni and cheese, per capita than any other nation on Earth. Canadians eat 55% more Kraft Dinner than Americans. The product was introduced to Canada in 1937 during the Great Depression. It cost 19 cents for a box that could feed a family. During World War II rationing, Kraft Dinner became a staple. Canadians developed a cultural attachment to boxed mac and cheese that never faded. The most stereotypically American food is actually most popular in Canada. Number 47. The town of Alert in Nunavut is the northernmost permanently inhabited place in the world. It sits just 817 kilometers from the North Pole. The population fluctuates between 60 and 80 people, mostly military and scientific personnel. Alert experiences 24-hour darkness from October to February and 24-hour daylight from April to August. Temperatures regularly drop below minus 40 degrees. The nearest civilization is over 2,000 kilometers away. Living in Alert means accepting isolation that's almost incomprehensible. At number 46, Canada's official phone number is 1-800-O-Canada. The government set up this number for citizens to get information about federal services. You can actually call Canada. The country has a customer service line. It's the most Canadian thing imaginable. A polite, accessible way to contact your government. Number 45. Basketball was invented by a Canadian. Dr. James Naismith from Almonte, Ontario, created the game in 1891 while working at a YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. He was trying to invent an indoor sport for winter that would keep athletes in shape between football and baseball seasons. Naismith nailed 2 peach baskets to opposite ends of a gymnasium and wrote 13 basic rules. The global basketball phenomenon came from a Canadian physical education teacher trying to keep students busy during cold weather. At number 44, the Canadian province of Newfoundland has its own time zone that's 30 minutes ahead of Atlantic time. Newfoundland Standard Time is UTC minus 3:30. It's one of only a few places on Earth using a half-hour deviation. The island is geographically positioned in a way that made the half-hour increment make sense. Newfoundland operates on its own schedule, literally. Even time zones couldn't convince Newfoundland to conform. Number 43. Canada has a UFO landing pad. The town of St. Paul Alberta built the world's first UFO landing pad in 1967 to celebrate Canada's centennial. The platform is 12 meters wide and weighs 130 tons. A time capsule is buried beneath it, set to be opened in 2067. The town takes extraterrestrial tourism seriously. There's even an official welcome sign for alien visitors. St. Paul prepared for first contact before anyone else. At number 42, the longest street in the world is in Canada. Yonge Street in Ontario stretches from Toronto to Rainy River near the Minnesota border. The street is 1,896 kilometers long. It was originally a trail used by Indigenous peoples, then became a military road in the 1790s. The Guinness Book of World Records recognized it as the longest street in the world. You could drive for 2 days straight and never leave Yonge Street. Number 41. Canada once went to war with Denmark over an uninhabited island, but the war was fought with bottles of alcohol. Hans Island sits between Greenland and Ellesmere Island. Both countries claim it. The Whiskey War began in 1984. Canadian soldiers would plant a flag and leave a bottle of Canadian whiskey. Danish military would replace it with a Danish flag and schnapps. This polite booze exchange continued for decades. In 2022, the countries finally agreed to split the island. The friendliest territorial dispute in history ended with compromise and presumably a lot of drinking. At number 40, Canada is home to the world's longest skating rink. The Rideau Canal Skateway in Ottawa becomes a massive ice rink every winter. The skateway stretches 7.8 kilometers through the heart of the capital. It's equivalent to 90 Olympic-sized skating rinks placed end-to-end. During Winterlude Festival, thousands skate to work, school, or just for fun. Vendors sell beaver tails, a fried dough pastry, along the ice. UNESCO designated the canal a World Heritage Site. Commuting by ice skate is a real winter option. Number 39. Canadians say so frequently that the Canadian Oxford Dictionary includes it as a legitimate word. Is used to turn statements into questions, to express surprise, or to seek agreement. The word appears in official dictionaries and is recognized internationally as distinctly Canadian. A single syllable became a national linguistic trademark. At number 38, the beaver is Canada's national animal. It was chosen for its importance to Canadian history. The fur trade, particularly beaver pelts, drove early Canadian exploration and economic development. The beaver appears on the 5-cent coin, called the nickel. This rodent that builds dams became the symbol of an entire nation. Canada chose a buck-toothed dam builder as its national icon and somehow made it work. Number 37. Canada has more donut shops per capita than any other country. Tim Hortons alone has over 4,000 locations across Canada. The chain was founded in 1964 by hockey player Tim Horton. Timmy's became a cultural institution. Canadians consume more donuts per person annually than Americans. Coffee and donuts aren't just breakfast. They're a way of life. The country runs on double-doubles and Timbits. At number 36, the town of Churchill, Manitoba, is known as the polar bear capital of the world. Every fall, polar bears migrate through town, waiting for Hudson Bay to freeze so they can hunt seals. Over 1,000 bears pass through annually. Residents leave their cars and houses unlocked in case someone needs to escape a bear quickly. There's a polar bear jail where problem bears are held before being relocated. Churchill built its entire identity around coexisting with apex predators. Number 35. Canada has a desert. The Osoyoos Desert in British Columbia is the northern tip of the Great Basin Desert. It's an arid shrub steppe ecosystem supporting species found nowhere else in Canada. Temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius in summer. Cacti, rattlesnakes, and scorpions live there. People think Canada is all snow and ice. Southern British Columbia has legitimate desert complete with dangerous wildlife and extreme heat. At number 34, Superman is Canadian. Joe Shuster, who co-created Superman with Jerry Siegel in 1938, was born in Toronto. Shuster lived in Toronto until age 10 before moving to Cleveland. Many believe Metropolis was inspired by Toronto. The Man of Steel has Canadian roots. The most American superhero was invented by a Canadian kid. Number 33. Canada has the longest coastline of any country on Earth. The Canadian coastline measures 243,042 kilometers. That's more than 6 times around the equator. The coastline is longer than the next 2 countries, Indonesia and Russia, combined. Canada borders 3 different oceans, Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. Managing and defending this massive coastline is a monumental task. At number 32, the Hawaiian pizza was invented in Canada. Sam Panopoulos, a Greek immigrant, created the controversial pineapple and ham pizza at his restaurant in Chatham, Ontario in 1962. He named it Hawaiian after the brand of canned pineapple he used. The combination sparked decades of debate. Some call it genius. Others call it culinary sacrilege. Canada invented pizza's most divisive topping combination and named it after somewhere else entirely. Number 31. Winnie the Pooh is based on a Canadian bear. A Canadian soldier named Harry Colborne bought a bear cub in Ontario in 1914. He named her Winnipeg, Winnie for short. Colborne brought Winnie to England during World War I and donated her to the London Zoo. Author A. Milne's son, Christopher Robin, loved visiting Winnie. Milne wrote stories about a honey-loving bear inspired by the Canadian animal. One of literature's most beloved characters has Canadian origins. At number 30, Canada tried to ban alcohol during Prohibition, but failed spectacularly. While the United States banned alcohol from 1920 to 1933, Canada had various provincial prohibitions that were poorly enforced. Canadian distilleries legally produced alcohol and technically exported it to other countries. In reality, bootleggers smuggled massive quantities across the border into the United States. Canadian whiskey producers became rich during American Prohibition. Canada became America's bartender. Number 29. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, are one of Canada's most recognizable symbols. The iconic red serge uniform and Stetson hat are known worldwide. The RCMP was created in 1873 as the Northwest Mounted Police to bring law and order to Western territories. Mounties became symbols of Canadian authority and justice. The musical ride, a ceremonial cavalry drill, has performed internationally for over 100 years. Canada's federal police force became a global cultural icon. At number 28, Canada has a town named Dildo in Newfoundland and Labrador. The town has approximately 1,200 residents. The name likely comes from an obsolete nautical term referring to a wooden peg or pin. Despite numerous petition attempts to change the name, residents have consistently voted to keep it. Dildo even trademarked its name to sell merchandise. The town embraced its unfortunate name and turned it into tourist attraction. Number 27. The CN Tower in Toronto was the world's tallest freestanding structure for 32 years. Construction finished in 1976, and it stood 553.3 meters tall. The tower was built to demonstrate Canadian engineering prowess. It survived multiple lightning strikes, earthquakes, and extreme weather. The Edgewalk attraction lets visitors walk around the outside of the tower's main pod, 356 meters above ground, tethered by a harness. The CN Tower dominated skylines and engineering records for decades. At number 26, Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. All federal services must be available in both languages. Product packaging displays both languages. The bilingual policy was established in 1969 under Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Approximately 22% of Canadians speak French as their first language. New Brunswick is the only officially bilingual province. Language politics remain contentious, especially in Quebec. 2 languages, 1 country, constant negotiation. Number 25. The Canadian Armed Forces were the first to allow women to serve in combat roles in 1989. Canada opened all military occupations to women without restriction. This progressive policy happened decades before most other countries. Women now serve in every branch and role. Canada led the way in military gender integration. At number 24, Montreal's underground city, the Riso, is the largest underground complex in the world. It connects 10 metro stations, 2,000 shops, 1,600 housing units, museums, universities, and more across 33 kilometers of tunnels. Over 500,000 people use it daily during winter. You can live, work, eat, shop, and be entertained entirely underground. Montreal built a subterranean city to escape winter. Number 23. The territory of Nunavut was created in 1999, making it Canada's newest territory. Nunavut means our land in Inuktitut. The territory covers 2 million square kilometers, making it the 5th largest country subdivision in the world. The population is only about 40,000 people. Nunavut gave Inuit people self-governance over their traditional homeland. It's one of the most sparsely populated regions on Earth. At number 22, Canada has a piece of France on its territory. The islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, just off the coast of Newfoundland, are French territory. These tiny islands are the last remnant of France's North American colonial empire. Residents are French citizens. The islands use the euro. France exists just 25 kilometers from Canadian shores. A European nation sits in Canadian waters. Number 21. The War of 1812 saw Canadian forces burn down the White House. British and Canadian troops invaded Washington, D.C. in August 1814. They set fire to the White House, the Capitol, and other government buildings in retaliation for American forces burning York, now Toronto. President James Madison and his wife Dolly fled before troops arrived. The White House was gutted by fire. Canada can legitimately claim it burned down the American presidential residence. Now, before we get to the top 20 facts that reveal Canada's darkest secrets, make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what's coming includes Indigenous tragedies, maple syrup heists worth millions, and stories that will change how you see the Great White North forever. Let's go. At number 20, the town of Snag, Yukon recorded the lowest temperature ever measured in continental North America on February 3, 1947. The temperature dropped to minus 63 degrees Celsius. That's minus 81.4 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, exhaled breath freezes instantly and falls to the ground, with a tinkling sound locals call the whisper of the stars. Any exposed skin freezes in seconds. Car engines must run continuously, or they'll never start again. Metal becomes brittle and shatters. Snag experienced cold that seems physically impossible. Number 19. Canada has a massive underground vault storing the world's agricultural seeds. The Canadian Grain Commission operates seed banks, but Canada also contributed to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. Additionally, Plant Gene Resources of Canada maintains seed collections as insurance against agricultural catastrophe. These collections preserve genetic diversity of crops. If global agriculture collapses, these seeds could restart civilization. Canada helps guard humanity's food future underground. At number 18, the Yule residential school system was one of Canada's darkest chapters. From the 1880s to 1996, over 150,000 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and sent to residential schools. The schools attempted to erase Indigenous culture, language, and identity. Children were abused physically, sexually, and psychologically. Thousands died from disease, neglect, and abuse. Unmarked graves have been discovered at former school sites. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented this cultural genocide. Canada's treatment of Indigenous peoples is a national shame that continues to require reckoning and reconciliation. Number 17. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist occurred in 2011 and 2012. Thieves stole 3,000 tons of maple syrup worth $18.7 million from Quebec's Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve. The syrup was stored in barrels in a warehouse. Thieves siphoned syrup from barrels, replacing it with water. The theft wasn't discovered for months. It became the most valuable heist in Canadian history. 26 people were arrested. The ringleader was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Canada takes its maple syrup so seriously, it maintains a strategic reserve that became the target of an elaborate heist. At number 16, Canada has more than 563 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, representing over 50 distinct Indigenous nations and language groups. Before European contact, millions of Indigenous people lived across what is now Canada. They had sophisticated societies, governments, and cultures. Colonization devastated these populations through disease, violence, and forced assimilation. Today, approximately 1.8 million people identify as Indigenous. The movement toward reconciliation and recognizing Indigenous rights continues. Canada's Indigenous peoples survived genocide and are reclaiming their languages, cultures, and sovereignty. Number 15. The Canadian town of Gander, Newfoundland, became famous on September 11, 2001. When American airspace closed after the terrorist attacks, 38 planes carrying 6,595 passengers were diverted to Gander's airport. The town's population doubled instantly. Residents opened their homes and provided food, shelter, and comfort to stranded passengers for 5 days. The story inspired the Broadway musical Come From Away. Gander demonstrated Canadian hospitality during America's darkest day. A small town became a symbol of kindness. At number 14, Canada has a town where you need permission to die. Longyearbyen in Svalbard. Wait, that's actually Norway. But Canada has its own remote communities with similar extreme conditions. In Canadian Arctic communities, bodies cannot be buried because permafrost makes it impossible to dig graves deep enough. Bodies can't decompose properly and could be disturbed by animals or erosion. Seriously ill people are typically flown to larger centers. The Arctic environment makes even death complicated. Number 13. Canada has a magnetic hill, where cars appear to roll uphill. Magnetic Hill in Moncton, New Brunswick is an optical illusion created by the surrounding landscape. When you put your car in neutral at the bottom of the hill, it appears to roll uphill on its own. It's actually rolling downhill, but the horizon line creates the illusion. Thousands of tourists visit annually to experience the phenomenon. Physics and perception collide at Magnetic Hill. At number 12, the Highway of Tears in British Columbia has been the site of numerous disappearances and murders. Highway 16, stretching 725 kilometers from Prince George to Prince Rupert, has seen at least 40 women, many Indigenous, go missing or murdered since 1969. The actual number could be much higher. Number 11. Canadians invented the paint roller, the electric wheelchair, the Robertson screw, the snowmobile, insulin, and the cardiac pacemaker. The list of Canadian innovations is remarkable for a country with a relatively small population. In 1922, Frederick Banting and Charles Best discovered insulin at the University of Toronto, saving millions of diabetics' lives. Joseph Armand Bombardier invented the snowmobile in 1937. John Hopps invented the first artificial pacemaker in 1950. Canadian ingenuity solved problems and saved lives worldwide. At number 10, Canada almost became part of the United States. During the American Revolution, the Continental Army invaded Quebec in 1775, hoping French Canadians would join the rebellion against Britain. The invasion failed. The Articles of Confederation included provisions for Canadian provinces to join the United States. During the War of 1812, the U.S. invaded again. Canada repelled them. Throughout the 19th century, some Americans advocated annexing Canada. Manifest Destiny included northern expansion. Canada resisted and developed its own identity, but the pressure from the South was constant. Number 9, the Halifax explosion in 1917 was the largest man-made explosion before nuclear weapons. On December 6th, a French cargo ship loaded with wartime explosives collided with a Norwegian vessel in Halifax Harbor. The French ship caught fire and exploded with the force of roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT. The blast killed approximately 2,000 people instantly and injured 9,000 others. It destroyed the Richmond neighborhood completely. Windows shattered 80 kilometers away. A tsunami followed the blast. Halifax was devastated. The explosion remained the largest non-nuclear explosion in history until nuclear weapons were developed. At number 8, Canada decriminalized homosexuality in 1969. Justice Minister Pierre Trudeau famously said, "There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation." Canada was progressive on LGBTQ plus rights decades before many countries. Same-sex marriage became legal nationwide in 2005. Canada has protections for gender identity and expression in federal law. The country moved from criminalization to recognition within a generation. Number 7. The October Crisis in 1970 was Canada's closest moment to martial law. The Front de Libération du Québec, FLQ, a radical separatist group, kidnapped British diplomat James Cross and Quebec Deputy Premier Pierre Laporte. The FLQ murdered Laporte. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act, the only peacetime use in Canadian history. Civil liberties were suspended. Hundreds were arrested without warrant. Soldiers occupied Montreal. The crisis tested Canadian democracy. The FLQ dissolved, but the trauma shaped Quebec politics for decades. At number 6, the Avro Arrow was an advanced supersonic interceptor aircraft developed by Canada in the 1950s. The Arrow was one of the most sophisticated aircraft of its era. It could fly at speeds over Mach 2. The program employed over 14,000 people and represented peak Canadian aerospace engineering. In 1959, Prime Minister John Diefenbaker abruptly canceled the program. All existing aircraft were ordered destroyed and cut into pieces. Blueprints and models were destroyed. Thousands lost their jobs. Many engineers left Canada for the United States, helping build NASA and American aerospace programs. The Arrow's cancellation remains one of Canada's greatest what-if moments. Number 5. The Winnipeg General Strike in 1919 was the largest strike in Canadian history. Over 30,000 workers walked off the job on May 15th. The strike paralyzed Winnipeg for 6 weeks. Workers demanded better wages, working conditions, and the right to collective bargaining. Business leaders and government officials feared communist revolution. On June 21st, Bloody Saturday, the RCMP charged strikers. 2 people were killed. Dozens were injured. The strike ended, but it galvanized the labor movement and changed Canadian labor relations forever. At number 4, the Dion quintuplets were born in Ontario in 1934 and became an international sensation. 5 identical girls, Emily, Yvonne, Cecile, Marie, and Annette, were born 2 months premature. Their survival was miraculous. The government seized the girls from their parents, making them wards of the state. They were put on display in a specially built compound called Quintland. Millions of tourists came to watch them play through one-way glass. The girls were treated like zoo animals. The exploitation lasted 9 years before they were returned to their family. They suffered abuse and were forced to pose for commercial endorsements. The Dion quintuplets were commodified and traumatized by their own government for profit. Number 3. The Quebec sovereignty referendum of 1995 nearly split Canada apart. The vote asked if Quebec should become independent. The NO side won by only 50.58% to 49.42%. A difference of just 54,288 votes kept Canada together. On referendum night, the nation held its breath. Quebec's separatism had come within 1 percentage point of success. The unity of Canada hung by a thread. The aftermath sparked debates about federalism, national identity, and Quebec's place in Canada that continue today. At number 2, the Komagata Maru incident in 1914 was one of Canada's most shameful racist episodes. A Japanese steamship carrying 376 passengers, mostly Sikhs from India who were British subjects, arrived in Vancouver. Canadian immigration officials refused to let them land based on racist, continuous journey regulations designed to exclude Asian immigrants. The ship sat in the harbor for 2 months. Passengers suffered in terrible conditions. Only 24 people were allowed to land. The ship was forced to return to India. When it arrived in Calcutta, British Indian police opened fire on passengers. 19 people were killed. Canada's racist immigration policies led directly to deaths. The government formally apologized in 2016, over a century later. And at number 1, the Canadian government forced Indigenous women to be sterilized without consent from the 1930s to the 1970s, and in some cases into the 1980s, Indigenous women were coerced or forcibly sterilized. Doctors sterilized women during cesarean sections without consent. Women were told they couldn't leave hospitals unless they agreed to sterilization. Alberta's Sexual Sterilization Act wasn't repealed until 1972. Survivors describe it as cultural genocide. The practice aimed to reduce Indigenous populations and eliminate Indigenous peoples. In 2017 and 2018, Indigenous women in Saskatchewan reported being pressured into tubal ligations while giving birth. The horror didn't end in the 1970s. Forced sterilization represents Canada's ongoing failure to protect Indigenous women and respect human rights. It's a crime against humanity that happened in modern Canada and has never been fully addressed or accounted for. From maple syrup heists to cultural genocide, from polite alcohol wars to forced sterilization, from world-changing inventions to national shame, Canada hides extraordinary stories beneath its reputation for politeness. The true North's history is far darker and stranger than the stereotypes suggest. Which fact shocked you most? Drop a comment. If you want more hidden truths, smash subscribe. See you next time.